All right, let's take our Bibles this morning and turn to the book of Deuteronomy and chapter 6. Deuteronomy and chapter 6. I came across a statement that I read, and this was made by a philosopher, so I don't necessarily recommend a philosopher. They often don't necessarily agree with the Bible, but he made an observation. And this was his observation. He said, "Could I climb to the highest place in Athens, I would lift my voice and proclaim, 'Fellow citizens, why do ye turn and scrape every stone to gather wealth, and take so little care of your children, to whom one day you must relinquish it all?'" Let me say that again. He said, "Fellow citizens, why do you turn and scrape every stone to gather wealth, and take so little care of your children, to whom one day you must relinquish it all?" And the idea is we live in this life, and part of life is, one of the aspects is to accrue wealth. I mean, part of that is we have to make money to live. And I wonder how many things as parents we engage in that one day, when it's all said and done, those things that are earthly will be passed on to somebody else. And how much time we spend gathering in this world, and how little time we spend on the next generation, to whom what we've gathered will be left to. And that ought to cause us to pause and to say, "Lord, help us." Because really the greatest thing that we will leave in this world, the greatest thing we will leave in this world is not going to be our wealth, but it will be our influence. And part of that will be our influence on our children. Certainly our influence is broader than just our children, but the greatest influence we have really is with our children. And so how much time is spent investing in that aspect? Now here in Deuteronomy chapter 6, this chapter, and really the book of Deuteronomy has many facets of it that deals with the responsibility of a parent to teach his children. And Deuteronomy chapter 6 is one of those chapters, and I'll be spending Sunday school hour this morning will be more practical, and then the message this morning will be right from this chapter. But I would like to address some things in this chapter. And the idea this morning is just give you some tips for doing family devotions with your family. All right, just some basic tips for doing family devotions in your home. And so notice Deuteronomy chapter 6. Let's begin reading in verse 1. The Bible says, "Now these are the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments, which the Lord your God commanded to teach you, that ye might do them in the land whither ye go to possess it, that thou mightest fear the Lord thy God, and keep all of his statutes and his commandments, which I command thee, thou and thy son and thy son's son, all the days of thy life, and that thy days may be prolonged. Hear therefore, O Israel, and observe to do it, that it may be well with thee, and that ye may increase mightily, as the Lord God of thy fathers hath promised thee in the land that floweth with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children." Now, I want to pause right here and notice that the first 7 verses is a focus on the parents, specifically even a focus on the fathers. The fathers, he mentions teaching their sons, and the focus is first on them, and then to bring the responsibility on passing that on to the children. I'll preach, one of the first points that I'll talk about in the morning message is that you can only give what you receive. You can only give what you receive. And so there's a focus on the things that we have to receive first, that we may pass those along to our children. And he says, so in verse 7, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. Does that seem that it needs to be part of every aspect of our lives? The whole of life. In the house, outside the house, in the morning, in the evening. I mean, he could go on and talk about, but he basically says your whole life needs to be, your whole life needs to be focused on teaching your children. And here's the challenge. It's hard and it's a lot of work. Now, we have 6 children, so I'll be the first to admit it's hard and it's a lot of work. But is there anything greater to invest in? Is there anything greater to invest in our lives than that? The answer is no. The answer is no. He goes on and he says, and thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes, and thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house and on thy gates. Now again, the emphasis is that it should be part of our entire lives. Now, we know that when you get to the New Testament, they took that literally. It was not meant to be taken literally, right? They would actually had things on their foreheads, and they would post scriptures on themselves, and the whole idea is kind of almost today a religious ritual type of, even the idea today is, Catholic, you put ash on your forehead and somehow that makes you spiritual, that you do something, and just because you say the rosaries 5 times meaninglessly, you just kind of repeat it and it has some spiritual significance. It was never meant to be that way. The idea is just you have to have a constant reminder of the truths of God in your home. That's the idea that he's communicating. He goes on in verse 10, and it shall be when the Lord thy God shall have brought thee into the land which he sware unto thy fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give thee great and goodly cities which thou buildest not, and houses full of all good things which thou fillest not, and wells digged which thou diggest not, vineyards and olive trees which thou plantest not. When thou shalt have eaten in full, then beware lest thou forget the Lord. See, the whole idea is there is a potential that you and your generation after you can forget God. And by the way, we have to be aware that this is the potential in all of our homes. It's the potential in all of our homes. That our generation, the generations after us, might forget God. Now, I believe that you have to read everything leading up to that. That means if we don't do the things leading up to that, then we will forget God. He goes on to say, then beware lest thou forget the Lord, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. Thou shalt fear the Lord thy God, and serve him, and shalt swear by his name. Ye shall not go after other gods, of the gods of the people which are round about you. For the Lord thy God is a jealous God among you, lest the anger of the Lord thy God be kindled against thee, and destroy thee from off the face of the earth. Ye shall not tempt the Lord your God, as ye tempted him in Mesa. Ye shall diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God, and his testimonies and his statutes, which he hath commanded thee. And thou shalt do that which is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may be well with thee, and that thou mayest go in and possess the good land which the Lord sware unto thy fathers, to cast out all thine enemies from before thee, as the Lord hath spoken. And when thy son asketh thee in time to come, saying, what mean the testimonies and the statutes and the judgments which the Lord our God hath commanded you, then thou shalt say unto thy son, we were Pharaoh's bondmen in Egypt, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. The idea here is that when you get to the land, and if you do what I've told you to do so that you don't forget God, there might reach a point when your children will ask, why are you teaching us this? Why are you teaching us the commandments and the statutes of God and the judgments of God? Why do you deem it necessary? Why are you investing all this in us? And what is it connected to? It's connected to their redemption. That's what he says. He says, when they ask you, why do you do this? You go all the way back. He says, because God brought us out of bondage. And there might be a time when our children ask us, well, why are you so concerned to bring us to church, Dad, Mom? Why you brought us every week, week after week after week after week? And why do we do family devotions? And why do we pray together? And why do we go visiting? And why do we do all those things? We always connect those things back to our personal redemption. That we have been saved from the bondage of sin. And that God has changed our lives from a life of bondage to a life of freedom. And that's what we connect everything we do to. So I want to spend some time this morning just giving some tips for doing family devotions with your family. And let me at the onset just say that when you think of family devotions, within those tips, I'll deal with an aspect that sometimes you have to, you have to do things that are age appropriate with your children. And what I mean by that is you shouldn't take a 2-year-old and read the Bible to them for an hour. Okay? It's not going to be effective. It's not going to work, and it's not going to do anything. And the only result that's going to happen is you're going to be frustrated. Okay? That's not going to help. And so when you think about those tips, part of the tips is to do something that is age appropriate. But we understand here that when he deals here in this chapter, he says that this ought to be part of your entire lives. When you sit in your house, when you're walking by the way, when you lay your bed at night, and when you wake up in the morning. And so the idea here is that more than having family devotions, I really want us to maybe have the mindset of having a devotional life. More than having family devotions, we have to have a devotional life. Family devotions will be part of a devotional life. But the point is that teaching children involves every aspect of our lives. It's not just limited to a 10-minute window once a day. So let me give you here some tips. And what I've done is I put a table and I've gathered. Now, this is not everything that I have, but I brought some books. Now, in no case do any of those books ever replace the Bible. Okay? I want to make that clear. But we ought to all sharpen ourselves. And, somebody may be to the perspective of, well, I don't read any books, I just read the Bible. Well, do you ever listen to preaching? Well, if you listen to preaching or teaching verbally, that's all that a book is in a book form. All right? It's somebody imparting wisdom, things that often that they've gained and that they've learned themselves. And so don't squander people, the things that they've learned. And most of the books is not somebody that says, hey, I'm an expert. Most good books that I read would say, hey, we have not arrived, but here are some things that we've learned. Often by trial and error. And so some of those are geared towards mothers, some geared towards fathers. Some of them are resources for good books that your children ought to read. Now, they ought to read the Bible, but also there's some good books that teach some character traits, and they ought to be by their level. One of the things we'll talk about here is some of them are even missionary biographies that are good just to read your children. I will never make my children go into the ministry. I will not make them go into the ministry. But if they go in the ministry, I will be thrilled. I will be thrilled if they serve God with their lives. Now, we need more lay people in the church. There's no doubt about that. But if they surrender, don't ever get in the way of that, parent. Don't get in the way of that. I've heard an account where young boy, I think he was 7 or 8, and he came to the altar and he went back to his parents and says, I surrendered to be a missionary. And the parents said, no. You're not gonna make any money if you're going to be a missionary. And squander that. Don't ever do that. Don't ever do that to your children. We have to be concerned for their spiritual welfare. So let me give you some tips. And some of those things will be twofold. As my wife and I know, we were talking on the way here, says, We have a lot of work to do, but we're trying as hard as we can to please the Lord. And guess what? We look back and we say, man, there's times that we had to say, well, let's stop doing this and let's start doing this. The point is we always have to be making adjustments in our lives. And as the children grow, you're making adjustments. And especially when you have children that range from 4 to 10, well, you can't, what's good for a 10-year-old is not going to work really for a 4-year-old. And so try to be appropriate in those things. But I remember what God says about Abraham in Genesis 18:19. He says, "For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, for that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him." So let me give you some tips. Tip number 1. Habitual is more impactful than occasional. Habitual is more impactful than occasional. And what I mean by that is when we think about the discipline here in Deuteronomy chapter 6, he says, "Thou shalt teach them," what's the word that he uses? Diligently. The idea of diligence, I think we're all aware, means that there has to be, when he's talking about in the morning, in the evening, in the home, by the way, when you walk, that there seems to be a sense of habitual, something that is done habitually. And here's what we have to arrive at. Now, by the way, it is harder to start a habit than it is to keep a habit. It is harder to start a habit than it is to keep the habit. You see, often when we think about family devotions, the challenge is not to keep, the challenge is to develop the habit. And part of that is, there's a sense of there's a busyness. Everybody's busy, and somebody may have a job that is the same every week. Somebody may have a job that it's different every week, and so sometimes there's some challenges. But there ought to be an effort in all of our homes to create something that is habitual. All right? Now that could be, so when we grew up, and I remember particularly our teenage years, our family, every meal, and so that's something I'm really grateful for, every meal we sat together as a family around the table. And as far as my recollection is, these are the fondest memories I have. And I'm thinking if we didn't have that moment when we all gathered around the table and all sat down and talked. Now, it's challenging when you have the 2-year-olds and the 3-year-olds. They want to get out every 10 minutes. But as we got older, we sat around the table, and having that time of communication and fellowship around the table, that was precious. And around the dinner table, every time after the dinner table, we had family devotions. We would go from the dining room table. Sometimes we'd do it at the dining room table, but we moved from that, and then we would go into the living room sometimes. Now, the point is, that became a habit. And so when the habit was in full force, when we didn't have it, it felt like something was missing. That's what I mean by doing something habitual. You know something is habitual when you don't do it, it feels like something is out of place. That is when something has become habitual. Some things that occasional is something, you do kind of do it every once in a while. Well, I know we're supposed to do family devotions, and so I guess let's do it now. Try to do a habit. Now, it seems in Deuteronomy chapter 6 that that's what they're instructing to the parents. In the morning, in the evening, you have to have a habit to where you're focused on teaching your children. So habitual is more impactful than occasional. And by the way, you find throughout the Bible, and by the way, it doesn't have to be the same for every family. Every family has really a different makeup, a different schedule, all right, a different work. And so you do what's work, but the point is, create habits in your home. When you read throughout the Bible, for example, you read of Daniel, he prayed. How many times did he pray a day? 3 times. When? Morning, noon, and evening. That was a habit, wasn't it? He established that habit, and that's what he did. You read some of the Psalms. In some Psalms, he talks about, I will in the morning will I wake up, and I will delight in the Lord. And so there's an emphasis on the morning. Some Psalms he talks about the evening. We read even about Jesus Christ at specific times. The Bible makes clear to point out that he went away and he prayed. And so there's times when there is kind of a removal, and it seems in the life of Jesus Christ that was something that was habitual. Even, by the way, Judas knew where Jesus, when he went to Jerusalem, knew where he would retreat. That was the Garden of Gethsemane. Why? Because it was habitual. And so it's important to understand that, and so we have to fight. If you don't have a habit in your home to do family devotion, an easy time to do it, by the way, is depending on your work schedule, but if you have a normal work week, is if you're gathered around the dinner table, is to do it right after dinner. That's an easy time because the family's already gathered. The fight happens in the developing of the habit. Once you establish the habit, it's easier to keep it. And so often we don't develop the habit. That's why we never end up doing it. So habitual is more impactful than occasional. Secondly, quality is more important than quantity. Let me say that again. Quality is more important than quantity. What makes a child spiritual is not you reading the Bible to them for 3 hours after dinner every night. You might be tempted to do that. You might think, well, that's going to make them spiritual. No. Focus on the quality. Now, that means that we have to discern. And we have to say, all right, here is my 2-year-old. What can my 2-year-old handle? Or, here's my 10-year-old. What can my 10-year-old handle? And so quality is more important than quantity, right? And so when we think about that, when the quality of what we do means that there has to be a level of effort that needs to put in. That means this: preparation. Preparation. That means you're going to have to prepare beforehand, think beforehand. Here is the things that I want to address. And those will be often, you have to do it to be quality, you have to do them age appropriate. Now, there are things you can do with the whole family, but there are other things that you cannot do with the whole family. So, at this stage, I'll show you one of the books that we do. So we have these are Christian heroes then and now. Those are missionary biographies. And we have a 4-year-old to 10-year-old. 3-year-old, she's 3. She's going to be 4. All right, thank you. I appreciate that. We have 6, all right, so you can you can understand. They can all at this point sit around the table and listen to a biography. And by the way, I don't read the whole book. I read a chapter a night. And that's something that they can all handle. This is about, 8 to 10 pages. And that's just one chapter of a biography each night. And by the way, we've had some precious times reading biographies around the table with children. Most of those biographies, a lot of them that we've read, some of them, not a lot of them, but many of them end with martyrdom. And tell you what, the spiritual atmosphere around the table is precious. And by the way, that's good for children. I think it was Sophia, she said, I don't want to read those biographies because the missionaries always end up dying. And we try to tell her, well, that's what a biography is. It's the life of a missionary, but we all live and we all die one day. And then you have an opportunity, and we're all going to die, but are we going to die serving the Lord? Or are we going to die living for ourselves? Which one is better? Oh, it's dying serving the Lord. And we just read, recently we did the Nate Saint. Nate Saint, he was the pilot, if you remember, with Eric, Jim Elliott. Nate Saint was the pilot, and he was killed. Now, you remember Jim Elliott went into the Amazon there, and they were trying to reach the indigenous people there with the gospel. And Nate Saint was the pilot. He drove them back and forth. Actually, he was the one that discovered where they were. And they landed. And tell you what, when we were reading that biography, I mean, it was all I could do, because in my mind, I'm thinking of myself. I'm thinking of my family. I'm thinking, what if God had not called me to pastor here in Wilmington, Delaware, but what if God had called me to a mission field like that? And here I was in the middle of the Amazon with my wife and my children back at the station. And having that commitment to say, if we go there, by the way, they had guns. They had guns. If we go there and if they attack us, we will not shoot back. Because if they're ever going to learn about forgiveness, they must learn it from us. By the way, their wives of these missionaries that were killed by these men, some of them went back in and reached those people and they got saved. Now, when you read that and you spend that time with your children, I mean, I'm bawling like a baby, you know. Those are special times. And so what I'm saying is, focus on quality, not quantity. Quality. Seek to have quality moments with your children. Another thing is, discerning a child's capacity is better than imposing unreasonable requirements. And so I already alluded to that, but you know, if you have a 2-year-old, say, all right, well, you need to sit here for 30 minutes while I read the Bible. Okay, that's not reasonable. Okay, now don't get me wrong, you should train a 2-year-old to sit down, and but there's a limit to that. Okay, don't abuse the child's ability. Don't make them, you know, every time you come around the corner, shake in fear of you and quake because you're coming, and they don't know if you're going to, you know, say something mean to them. And you know, you know what I'm talking about here. Create a right type of atmosphere. What I'm saying is, children should not dread family devotions. They should look forward to it. So you create an environment that they enjoy, not an environment that they repel. And say, what? Oh, family devotions. Oh, again. So discern a child's capacity is better than imposing unreasonable requirements. Also, a focused approach will be necessary at times. Now, Pastor Starr mentioned yesterday he gave this list. Those are operational definition of character qualities. And so those are basically character qualities, and you have truthfulness, alertness, self-control, wisdom, resourcefulness, orderliness, attentiveness, obedience, hospitality, reverence, discernment, thriftiness, initiative, sensitivity, sincerity. You have a bunch of those. Those are character qualities. And what you could do is, when you see some, by the way, you're the parent. God has given you the responsibility to discern your children when they need help, and He's given you the responsibility to help them. They are not going to help themselves. A child left to himself, what is it? Bringeth his mother to shame. It is not the way God designed. Now, I know the world's philosophy today is, I know what it is. Well, let a child discover kind of their... No! Absolutely not! That's a world's philosophy. And it is a wicked philosophy. The child does not need to discover. To discover himself means he's a sinner. And he is wicked at the core, just like you and I, by the way. He's no different than us. They come, the Bible says, out of the womb speaking lies. And I know they're beautiful when they come out, and they're precious. And when they first cry, you say, oh, this is beautiful. I love it when they cry. Even when they have their first bowel movement, it's wonderful. But they're sinners. And God has given the parent the responsibility, and at times you may need to have a focused approach. Okay? Now, one of our child, I won't say the name, one of our child has struggled for a while with lying. And so I felt that we need to address that specifically with this child. Not, by the way, in a public setting with all the other children. Now, sometimes if they're all lying, you deal with it with all of them. But if you see a character deficiency in one child, you're the parent. It's your responsibility to teach them. And by the way, when I mean teaching them, it's not, stop lying, and then move on with your life. That's not teaching. That's not teaching. For a while back, so the first one on there is truthfulness. I was like, oh, this is good. Good truthfulness. Teaching is not about just reproving the negative. It's about emphasizing the positive. So you take the first, so let me give you an example of what I did with our children. So truthfulness, so if we do Bible time in the morning with the children, truthfulness, I take this character quality and then I can go to Bible examples. So all right, today and I'll just take one Bible example about truthfulness. And so all right, here is Abraham. Abraham went to Egypt. Here's what he did. He was not truthful. Here's the result of what happened because he was not truthful. Okay? And just take that 10 minutes. Okay? Focus on, and then the next day, here's look as a positive example. Here's a positive example of someone who was truthful. And here's the result of that. Day 3, here's a proverb on truthfulness. You see what I'm saying? Teaching. And so this is just a guide. But you take a guide and you just spend a few minutes and say, all right, here, let's focus on truthfulness. And so a focused approach will be necessary at times. And it's your responsibility as a parent to discern your child. Nobody knows your child better than you. And so learn your child, discern the things that they need to work on. And so I'll just give you an example. One of our child has a problem with laziness. We have another child that doesn't have that problem. She's a worker. She works hard. And she takes initiatives. And it's like, wow, I mean, that's impressive. I didn't know if I was like that when I was that age. But then we have another child that's completely lazy. Not bad attitude, but just lazy. Well, we have to emphasize that with that particular child. And so a focused approach will be necessary at times. Right now with the 2 older ones, so I put together a discipleship. And so right now with the 2 older ones, I'm going through the discipleship material. Now that is adult discipleship, but I feel that they are mature enough to go through that. And by the way, now it's 156 pages. Fill in the blank, looking at the scriptures. And I'm not saying this to boast, but I'm just saying they love it. You know why they love it? I don't know if it's the spiritual aspect or the fact that they get to spend time with Daddy. But they love it. And I'm thrilled that they love it. It's adult material. But they love it. Now, I sense that they were ready for that. Now, I have another child who said, I want to do the discipleship that they're doing. I said, you're not ready. You're not ready. And so, a focused approach, okay? It's your responsibility to see your children where they are and to help them in the next stage, to help them along. The next one is variety will often be more helpful than monotony. Now, sometimes, and this is, by the way, this, if you're a parent, this is parenting. You always have to make adjustments. You have to make adjustments. Your life is going to be changing all the time. I mean, when they're first born, they don't sleep. They don't sleep, and so your life is quite adjusted. Then they get to the point where they sleep, and sometimes you, depending on what your schedule is, you have to make some adjustments. And so sometimes it's important, sometimes we get into a monotony where it's just always the same thing. And so sometimes if we introduce variety, that will be beneficial. So I'll show you some variety here. All right, and this one here. All right, so do not give a 6-year-old Pilgrim's Progress. Now, the full version, but there's still the children's version. All right? That's a good, and this is really short. Now, Pilgrim's Progress is a, really, it's got some difficult words in there. I would say for adults sometimes it can be tough. But there's children's version that are good. This is Texas Pete. It was put together by evangelist Richard Harper. But that's just basically a story and filled with Bible principles. But it's basically a fun, exciting story that's good for younger children. When our children were really small, now the youngest one is three. I got that right. And so, but when they were all small, at the time we had 6 children, 6 and under. That was hard. But here is, have a question about God, Doctrine for Children and Their Parents. This is really a nice book. Some of the basic, but this is good for very young children. This is a good one. Missionary biographies. Those are good. Everybody enjoys that. Devotionals. There's all kinds of things on the table. I put those on the table so that you can just look at it, not take it. All right. But if you want to take a picture and then order the book for yourself, that'll be good. I'll mention something else. Also, the next one, I'll have to end here because we're past time. The why is better than the what. The why is better than the what. The children need to be inculcated into why we do this, not what we do. Well, we do that. Well, the pastor says we have to have family devotions, let's do it. No. Why do we do it? Why do we do it? Next one, I have to just read the sincerity is always received better than severity. Sincerity is always better received than severity. Okay? And this goes with the last point. Vulnerability yields greater benefit than a show of perfection. I'll just expound the last point. I'll be done because I have to go. And I'm saying this because of how I grew up, but I also say this because of what I'm trying to do with my children. None of us as parents are perfect. None of us are perfect. The times that marked me the most as a child, I just picture in my mind, so it's hard for me to, was when my dad would come in, he would get on his knees before me and he would say, "Son, I'm sorry. I reacted in anger towards you. Would you forgive me?" Man, that had an impact. But you know what I thought? I didn't think at that moment, my dad's, he doesn't have it all together. He's got all these issues. That was not what I thought. I thought, God's got a hold of him. God is working in his heart. That's how I thought. As parents, we better communicate the fact that we are not perfect to our children, that we are always improving, that God is speaking to us, and sometimes we need to make adjustments in our lives, and our children need to see that. If our children never see any change in us, God never working in us, can we expect God to work in them? So vulnerability yields greater benefit than a show of perfection. If you never get to the place where I'm not going to admit, then you're doing your children a disservice. Because the truth is, your children know you. They know you're not perfect. But you know what they see? You never admit to it. Hypocrisy is the killer of children. Hypocrisy is the killer of children. For them to love the Lord one day. And so, seek to communicate that to your children. There's been times when I have to gather all the children and say, "Here's what I've done wrong. Would you please forgive me?" And by the way, every time, you know what they do? They always run up and hug me. "Oh, it's okay. You're a great daddy," all that stuff. And so, that's all I have the time for. But I hope that the point is, sharpen yourself to do family devotions.